Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Mahua Nigurkar. I am a faculty with the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. The module that we are going to cover today is titled Children Under the Purview of the Juvenile Justice System. This module is part of within the subject of criminology. Now, what will this module cover? This module will primarily cover three things. A, it will cover child vulnerability, the different factors and causes for child vulnerability. It will also cover the different categories of children who come within the juvenile justice system. And finally, it will briefly outline the rehabilitative provisions or measures for such children. Now, moving on to the first topic, and that is child vulnerability. Now, all children, irrespective of the size of the family, irrespective of the structure of the family, are born into a family. And it is the family that the child learns about relationships, the child gets cared for, the child is protected, abuse and exploitation is prevented, and we can say that the family creates a safety net. Thereafter comes the school, the child goes to school, child starts learning, but the child continues to grow up well and get nurtured in the family. Now, ideally, family is considered the right or the appropriate place for a young child to grow up. However, you and I know that all children do not grow up or often are not able to grow up in a happy and nurturing family. And there are a variety of reasons for this. Sometimes there is abuse and exploitation within the family itself. Sometimes due to poverty and other economic conditions, children go into child labor at a very, very young age. Sometimes there could be dysfunctional or difficult or negative relationships within the family which impacts the growing child's life. So there are different factors why children growing up in a family sometimes come out of the family net. Now there are also certain structural factors such as the gender, such as region, class, caste, gender of the child. All of this also can become factors wherein the child's vulnerability can get increased. So, child poverty creates its own situation of deprivation and disadvantage for the child. The child grows up without access to several entitlements and services such as health, nutrition, education. Many a times children growing up in poor families often have family members who do not or who are not able to rather give enough time to their children. It is not that they do not want to give time to their children, but they are so busy trying to survive, trying to find their sources of livelihood that many times these children grow up neglected. Also, children growing up in poorer situations are at greater risks of vulnerability, greater risk of marginalization. So, when we look at child vulnerability, we need to understand that there would be a range or a combination of factors that leads to child vulnerability. One could be the familial situation, so situations arising out of home, excessive discipline, too much of beating, over expectations from the child, not being able to give enough time to the child, and many other things that could be linked to the family. Then you would have other situations such as economic factors, child poverty. Also, another very important point to note is that the structural situations in society such as gender, caste, class, religion, the region, the identity that we are growing up also can lead to child vulnerability in many of the children's cases. So, coming back to this point on who are the children who come under the purview of the juvenile justice system, when children come out of this family net for one reason or the other, and there could be many other reasons than what I have outlined before you now. So, do read up the write-up which is there with this module to get further details on child vulnerability, different factors for vulnerability, child poverty, and so on and so forth. Now, if we look at the juvenile justice system, the Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children Act 2015 governs the juvenile justice system in India. The juvenile justice system is a large network of children's institutions, allied systems, adjudicating bodies, mandated requirements that are to be met within the juvenile justice system. So it's really a very, very large network, and it is one of the largest network which is governing the lives, or rather reaching out to vulnerable lives in the Indian context. Now what is this network? So this network has two adjudicating bodies, Child Welfare Committee, Juvenile Justice Board. This network also has many children's homes and institutions. Some of them are mandated by the Juvenile Justice Act 2015, and some are allied systems and homes that interface with the juvenile justice system. Now, who are the children who come within the juvenile justice system? By and large, there are of course exceptions, but by and large, children who come within the juvenile justice system are vulnerable. And there is, as I have mentioned before, there are different reasons for which children become vulnerable. Now, within the Juvenile Justice Act, the children have been categorized into two different groups. A, child in need of care and protection, and B, child in conflict with the law. Now, these two categories of children, we need to understand about them well, because if we have to work within the juvenile justice system, then by and large, we will be working with these two groups of children. Now, who are children or child in need of care and protection? Within the Juvenile Justice Act, there is a very clear definition of who would be the children who comprise this group of child in need of care and protection. If you look at the definition, you will find that there are a range of situations wherein children become abandoned, children become destitute, children are without family or family support, and in the absence of a family or in the absence of family support, it is the state who takes over the care and protection of the child. And this care could be short term, this care could be temporary, or this care could be long term till the child attains 18 years of age. So it's not necessary that every child who comes within the juvenile justice system will stay on within the juvenile justice system till they complete 18 years of age. It depends on circumstances of the child's life and how far rehabilitation is possible. Now, who are the children in need of care and protection? These could be children who are found in exploitative child labor situations. These could be missing children, destitute children, abandoned children. These could be street living or street connected children. These would be children from families where the family is simply unable to take care of the child, and that is why the child is in a situation of grave danger. These could be children who are victims of child sexual abuse or exploitation. These could be children who are trafficked or rescued from trafficking. These could be children who are being pushed into addiction, pushed into peddling drugs, being used or rather misused and ill-used by adults for their own illegal gains. So in short, all children who are facing different situations of vulnerability, who may be facing different situations of abuse, exploitation, neglect, and also who are within these categories of child in need of care and protection as defined by the Juvenile Justice Act would be coming under the purview of the Juvenile Justice Act. Now we move on to the second category of children, and that is child in conflict with law. Child in conflict with law are those children who are alleged to have committed offences. That is, there are offence charges against them. They have not yet completed 18 years of age, and as per the laws of the land, all young persons who have alleged offence charges and who have not completed 18 years of age come under the purview of the juvenile justice system. Now, we need to note here one very important point, and that point is these are children on whom or against whom there are alleged offence charges. These offence charges have to be proved through the due process of law and through the due course of inquiry. The second point to be noted is both these groups of children, child in need of care and protection and child in conflict with the law, come under the Juvenile Justice Act and the Juvenile Justice System. If we go back to the title of the Juvenile Justice Act, it states juvenile justice Care and Protection of Children Act 2015. This indicates that both these groups of children, irrespective of whether they are child in need of care and protection or they are child in conflict with law, are entitled to care and protection from the system. And this is a very important point for us to note, that both these categories of children are deserving of right kind of measures for them and rehabilitation and social reintegration. Now, the overarching philosophy and principle of the juvenile justice system is rehabilitation and social reintegration. So, what do we mean by rehabilitation and social reintegration? The Act has tried to show us the different ways in which we can rehabilitate and socially reintegrate child in need of care and protection and child in conflict with the law. Now, within the juvenile justice system, there are two separate independent adjudicating bodies, or rather statutory bodies, who deal with the cases of these children. First, I will touch upon child in need of care and protection. When such a child is found, and any of us who come across such a child without family or family support can approach the police, can approach Childline, which is an emergency helpline 1098, can go up to the Child Welfare Committee and place this child, and then they can take the next step of action. If in case the child requires to come within the juvenile justice system, then certain procedures will follow. So, the statutory body or the mandated body which looks into cases of child in need of care and protection is the Child Welfare Committee. This committee comprises a team of experts who will look into every child's case, who will work with the probation officers, who will find out what is required for that each child. So, there will be an unique approach to unique needs of every child, and thereafter they will pass suitable final orders. Now, for child in need of care and protection, primarily rehabilitation would be in 2 or 3 or 4 arenas. One would be family tracing. So, children who have been found without family, children who are missing, children who for some reason have left their home or have been compelled to leave home and are alone, family tracing becomes a very, very crucial part of the work of the juvenile justice system, and several suitable orders are passed by the Child Welfare Committee to ensure that family tracing is done. So, family tracing, family restoration, family reunification, this is one of the very critical roles of the Child Welfare Committee, because there is a recognition that children can go back home if the family is in a position to take care of the child. And of course, for missing children, the family is desperately looking out for them and hoping that very soon they will get reunited with their child. So, family tracing becomes a very, very critical role, because one of the principles of Juvenile Justice Act and one of the principles governing the juvenile justice system is that institutionalization of the child, that is, admitting the child into a residential care institution, must be the absolute last resort. So, when all other measures to rehabilitate the child outside the juvenile justice system do not seem to be working for particular children, then such children can go into residential care facilities. So, family reunification, repatriation, family tracing would be one option. The second option is, let us say the child has a family, but for some reason the child is not being able to go back to the family, the child does not want to go back to the family, for some reason the family is not in a position to take care of the child. Then through certain procedures, certain measures, the Child Welfare Committee takes a decision on what would be the best rehabilitative option for the child. So, it is possible that the child can go into a children's home for a temporary period, or it is also possible that in case the child is destitute, the child could go into a children's home for a more long-term period of care. So, children's home is a residential care facility for children who are child in need of care and protection as defined by the JJ Act. Period of stay in the children's home can be short term, can be long term, depending on the needs of the child, depending on the circumstances of the case of the child. Then there is a very, very important arena of rehabilitative measures and social reintegration. Ultimately, with rehabilitation and social reintegration, the whole purpose is to take the child back into mainstream society. We do not want children to grow up isolated. We do not want children to grow up in children's institutions. We want children to be in mainstream society. We want children to be in their families, or probably if for some reason families are not available, then other suitable substitute care arrangements. One very important arena within this is non-institutional services or alternative care. So, non-institutional services or alternative care is not merely a substitute to institutionalization. It is a wide spectrum of services, of facilities that can help create for the child a suitable family-like or family-based environment in case the child's own family for some reason is not with the child or is not able to take care of the child. So, some of the very important non-institutional measures or alternative care would be adoption, foster care, sponsorship, and aftercare. Now, if you read the Juvenile Justice Act 2015, you will find that there are definitions of all of these terms, and we can gain further clarity on these measures. So, for child in need of care and protection, if family reunification or if family restoration is not possible, then a very good alternative is adoption, wherein the child's right to a family gets fulfilled, a family also gets a child, and it is done through a legal process, and the child inherits all the legal rights that any other child would inherit in a family. Then you have foster care. In foster care, the child can move into a family-like or family-based environment with extended family through kinship care for a temporary basis till probably the crisis in his or her own family gets resolved. So, foster care is also a very, very important alternative care measure. Then you have sponsorship. There are many children who can go back to their families, who can stay with their families. But however, due to economic reasons, the family is in need of some additional support. So, instead of institutionalizing such children, sponsorship can be a very, very good non-institutional measure. So, in sponsorship, the child continues to remain in the family, and supplementary care by way of, let's say for example, educational sponsorship, meeting medical needs, giving support for crisis within the family, giving support for health care, all of this through sponsorship, through additional support can ensure that the child continues to remain within the family, does not get separated from the family, the child is not needlessly institutionalized, things will work out well for the family and the child. One more area of alternative care is aftercare. Now, aftercare is again a very, very important non-institutional measure. Now, what is aftercare? There are several children who continue to remain within the juvenile justice system till they attain majority of age, and that is they attain age 18. Now, the Child Welfare Committee realizes that even at age 18, the child really has nowhere to go. Either the child does not have family, or the child is not that independent at age 18 to immediately start leading an independent life, or probably the child does not have relations or extended family to whom the child can go back to. Now, aftercare becomes a very, very significant area of reaching out to such children who, though they have completed 18, are still not completely in a position to join mainstream society. So, aftercare becomes a process of transition. Such children, after they complete age 18, they can move into aftercare homes, group homes, aftercare hostels, and there are many organizations who are working on aftercare, because you and I would understand that at age 18, in the eyes of the law, the child would have attained majority. But at age 18, are we really fully equipped to lead independent lives? Are we really fully equipped to lead financial secure lives? For most of us at age 18, our education is also not completed. And hence aftercare becomes this halfway transition between the juvenile justice system, the children's home where the child may be staying, and back into mainstream society. So coming back to the rehabilitative measures of child in need of care and protection. So one option would be, yes, the child goes back to his or her own family. The second option would be non-institutional services or alternative care. And then I have also spoken about aftercare for children who complete age 18, and then they would still need some more rehabilitative measures and facilities for them. So child in need of care and protection, the Child Welfare Committee works with this group of children, works with the probation officer, works with other organizations. There may be NGOs and civil society also works with the Child Welfare Committee. So it is largely a team of people who work on child in need of care and protection. The Child Welfare Committee gives the final order for every child's case, and individual care plans are made for every child's case. Now we move on to the second group of children, or the second category of children, and that is child in conflict with law. The JJ Act, as I have mentioned earlier, has two very distinct independent adjudicating bodies for these two categories of children. So for child in conflict with law, the mandated body or the adjudicating body is the Juvenile Justice Board. Now the Juvenile Justice Board is a socio-legal board. By this I mean that the composition of the Juvenile Justice Board, as mandated by the Juvenile Justice Act, is inherently socio-legal in nature. It comprises a judicial magistrate and two social work members. So the judicial magistrate and the two social work members form a socio-legal bench titled the Juvenile Justice Board. And this board, with these members, look into each and every case of child in conflict with law. And they are the final adjudicating body within the juvenile justice system who passes the final order for child in conflict with law. The rehabilitative options or social reintegration options are a little different for juveniles or child in conflict with law, but they are not completely different from the way we would look at rehabilitation or social reintegration of child in need of care and protection. One thing we need to understand, that child vulnerability impacts different children differentially. So the factors of vulnerability and some of the factors what we have discussed earlier may be common to both groups of children, child in need of care and protection and child in conflict with law. One thing we really need to remember, and remember this while we are working or whenever we are working with children within the purview of the juvenile justice system, that factors of vulnerability impacts different children differentially. And if you look at the factors of vulnerability in the lives of children in need of care and protection and factors of vulnerability in the lives of child in conflict with law, you will find that the reasons for which children come within the system or reasons for which children become vulnerable are quite similar in both these groups of children. As I mentioned earlier, when children come out of the family net, when children are without adult protection, when children are alone on the streets for different reasons, for a variety of causes, the fallout of that could be in different directions. A child can go missing, a child can get trafficked, a child can get into child begging situations, child may move into child labor, a child can also go into addiction, and a child can also get pushed into situations of crime. So child vulnerability and its fallouts work differently for different children. And some children come into the juvenile justice system as child in need of care and protection, and there are these other children who come as child in conflict with law. The Juvenile Justice Act recognizes that both these groups are entitled to care and protection, both these groups are entitled to rehabilitation and social reintegration. So now what are the rehabilitative options or social reintegration options for child in conflict with law? One of the sections of the Act, and I would encourage you to read the Juvenile Justice Act very closely if you want to work in this area, or if you want to build your own knowledge and understanding of the juvenile justice system in India. There are certain sections within the Act which pertain to what would be the measures taken for children in conflict with law or child in conflict with law. Now, as far as the final order of the Juvenile Justice Board goes, then section 18 of the Act has several rehabilitative options. Even in the situation of child in conflict with law, the principle that institutionalization must be the last resort for children applies to this group of children as well. So what would be the different options? Now, based on the circumstances of the case, based on the age of the child, based on the offence charge, based on the family situation of the child, the board takes a well-informed decision. And this decision will then lead to a final order. Some of the options before the Juvenile Justice Board are, as per the Juvenile Justice Act of 2015 are, the child can go home back with his or her family on advice or admonition. The child can go back home on supervision under the supervision of a probation officer or any other fit facility or fit person or any other authority whom the board mandates that yes, the child should be under the supervision of this person. The child can also be directed, or the family can also be directed to pay a fine. Then there are two other very important options, such as group counseling and community service. So in group counseling, the child can be in group processes, and through the group process method, counseling can happen, and then the board can decide what would be the different, what would be the different directions given to the child while this child is undergoing through the group counseling process. Community service is yet another viable option for child in conflict with law. Within community service, the board can give an order that the child can do some kind of community work or voluntary work, and this voluntary work could happen in a school, could happen in a home for the elderly, could happen in a children's home, the child could be working, for example, with the traffic police, the child could be working as a volunteer in a hospital, the child could be working with an NGO, taking classes of other children. So there are very many options within community service. Community service, and before I move on to community service, I would also like to add on that within the Juvenile Justice Act, there is no really provision of punishment, because the whole recognition is that children who allegedly commit offences or through a process of inquiry are found to have committed an offence, they require rehabilitation, maybe correctional work for some children, and social reintegration. They do not require punishment, because society recognizes that young persons would require a different kind of approach vis-a-vis adults who may be having committed the same crime. And that is why there is no concept of punishment, and rightfully so, within the juvenile justice system. So community service is not really a punishment for the child. It is rather, the concept of community service is to recognize that this child in conflict with law also has potential, also can contribute to society, and this child's talents can be used in the form of community service. So community service becomes a very viable rehabilitative measure for child in conflict with law. The child continues to remain with family, the child's regular routine continues, and at the same time the child becomes a volunteer and does community service. This also increases the child's confidence and feeling of dignity and a feeling of self-worth, that even children who may have committed offences can become valuable and contributing members of society in a very positive way. One of the other options of rehabilitation for child in conflict with law is admission of the child in a special home for a certain period of time. Special home is a residential care facility for children in conflict with law. Just as children's home is a residential care facility for child in need of care and protection, special home is primarily and specifically meant for child in conflict with law. Again, the child is not admitted in a special home for punishment purposes. Rather, it is for rehabilitation. So, children will learn there may be educational options, there may be vocational training options. If the child is in need of counseling or some kind of mental health support, there will be options as well. So, the child grows up in this residential care facility. The child's talents, the child's aptitude, the child's future plans are planned through an individual child care plan, and then after a stipulated period of time, the child can leave this facility called the special home. There are other options too. Now, I would also like to mention that within the Juvenile Justice Act of 2015, for the first time, children between 16 and 18 years of age, if they are under charges of heinous offences, then at the discretion of the Juvenile Justice Board, they may be transferred to the Children's Court for further processing of their case. Now, to know more details about this, please read the JJ Act 2015 thoroughly. Not necessary that all children who are between 16 and 18 years of age will automatically get transferred to the Children's Court. There are a set of provisions and measures which guide these decisions. Even within the Children's Court, such children, there will be individual child care plans and there will be focus given on the future plans of the child as well as rehabilitation wherever possible and wherever required. So, this in short is about the rehabilitative options within the category or for the category of child in conflict with law. Now, moving on from rehabilitation and social reintegration to another chapter of the JJ Act, and I would draw your attention to it. This chapter is a very important chapter because this chapter outlines the different sections which can be put against adult perpetrators or any perpetrator who commits crimes against children. So, this section need not necessarily only pertain to child in need of care and protection or child in conflict with law. When crimes and offences happen against any child in society, so these offences and crime could be in the arena of using children for drug peddling or smuggling, using children for terrorist activities, forcing a child to beg, sexual or commercial exploitation of children. So, any kind of crimes committed against any child, these sections can be used in conjunction with IPC and other relevant laws as charges which deal with crimes against children. Now, this is a very, very important section because the law recognizes that just as you have vulnerable children within these two categories of child in need of care and protection and child in conflict with law, there are also a lot of crimes being committed against children. And that is why it is important that apart from IPC and other laws of the land which deal with crimes against children, the JJ Act also has a separate chapter which talks about crimes against children. The Juvenile Justice Act also has a chapter dealing with specifically on rehabilitation, social reintegration and non-institutional services. So, do read up the write-up, do read up the Act because it is not possible to build our understanding without reading the Act, without reading the Juvenile Justice Model Rules, or if our own state has formulated our own state juvenile justice rules, we need to read up on this. Also, the references that have been given, and of course, nothing stops you from doing additional reference work also to build your understanding on children who come under the purview of the juvenile justice system. So, in summary, I would state that this module has tried to cover some of the basic concepts of child vulnerability, child poverty, situations which bring children within the juvenile justice system. Thereafter, this module has moved on to the two categories of children, child in need of care and protection and child in conflict with law, has briefly highlighted who are child in need of care and protection, who are child in conflict with law, which are the mandated bodies which will work with these groups of children. The module has also briefly touched upon the role and powers of the Child Welfare Committee, the Juvenile Justice Board. The Child Welfare Committee works with child in need of care and protection. The Juvenile Justice Board works with child in conflict with law. And then we have also moved on to what are the different rehabilitative measures, both within the context of child in need of care and protection and the rehabilitative measures within the context of child in conflict with law. So, I would like to really end by emphasizing that we look at child vulnerability seriously. We effectively implement the laws and legislations of the land, including the Juvenile Justice Act, for ensuring that every child who is without family or without family support is able to grow up in an atmosphere and environment of care and protection. Every child's child rights are met. And coming back specifically within the juvenile justice system, the overarching philosophy of the juvenile justice system being rehabilitation and social reintegration, we ensure that every child who comes within the juvenile justice system, irrespective of whether they are a child in need of care and protection or whether they are a child in conflict with law, provisions of rehabilitations are effectively implemented in discussion with the child, planning an individual child care plan, planning the future goals in a manner which is relevant to the child's life, so that when the child goes out of the juvenile justice system, the child is better equipped, the child has better adult support, and the child is able to lead a happy and constructive life. So, thank you very much.